Are you excited for the release of this new shading tech and want to know more? Are you frustrated because all you can find are videos of people that just repeat what was said during Epic's presentation without adding anything useful? Cheer up, you finally found someone that actually put in the time and effort to understand how Substrate works and will share with you everything in a very long and boring series of videos. But first, let me tell you this. As a technical artist specialized in shaders creation with a decent amount of years of experience on his back, what do I think about this new feature?
It's good, I like it a lot.
And I say it as one that has stopped getting excited by every new shiny bit of revolutionizing tech released in an incomplete state of development long time ago. Does it mean that my advice is to run and convert all your project to this new pipeline then?
Absolutely not.
Sad truth is that you already have all the tools you need to create exceptionally good materials. Substrate will not make you create better ones by magic, will only offer you more options to tank the frame rate. See, the main reason it exists is because Epic is trying to place Unreal Engine as the new standard software for cinema CGI. That's why its main selling point is the layerability of multiple BRDFs, because until now, that's the most visually obvious limitation of the current system. Why did I say I like it then? Because it gives you a lot more freedom for the creation of a PBR material, mainly by removing the limit of having to select a shading model in advance. Moreover, it allows the shader artist to modularly organize everything in a very interesting way, but we'll talk about that another time. In this video, we'll talk about base color, specular, metallic, and roughness. All things that, as you can clearly see, don't exist anymore, aside from the last one, which has received a nice upgrade. I would have included normal, anisotropy, tangent, and emissive color to the list, but there's not much to say about them. They work exactly the same way as before. Let's start with these three: base color, specular, and metallic. We find them in this new shape of Diffusion Albedo and F0. At first glance, one could think that the diffuse albedo is only a renaming of the base color, while the F0 is a sort of combination of specular and metallic. After all, it seems like that the first assigns the color to the surface, and the second goes from behaving as a specular for very low values to behaving as a metallic for higher ones. It's weird though, seems like the metallic reflections always tend to white, ignoring the color as the F0 value approaches 1. Likely they gave us an handy function to convert from the old system to the new. Let's use it. Let's hook the parameters and use the debug function to print out the result. Oh, interesting. It looks like that as the metallic goes up, the diffuse albedo goes to 0, while the F0 goes from 0.04 to the base color value. So F0 is a color too. So, apparently with this new pipeline we have the possibility of independently choose the color of the light diffused by the surface and the color reflected by it. But how does this conversion actually work? Let's create a little graph that plots how these outputs change when the metallic changes. If you take a vertical line on this graph, you can see what's the diffuse albedo value when a certain metallic value is given. As we already saw, this material property goes to 0 for metallic materials. One more thing that we now know though is that it does it in a linear fashion. And the same seems to be true for the F0 property. So, since it looks like this function just does a couple of very simple linear interpolation, I'd say that we could expand its content to something like this. So, what's the takeaway at the end? If your material is dielectric, you just play with the diffuse albedo. If it's conductive, you just play with the F0. If it's a bit of both, you need 2 RGB textures for it, and you have to remember to make the diffuse black in the metallic areas. Or you can try out weird combos of diffuse and reflected colors. I don't know if there's any material that behaves like that at all, but you know, artistic freedom. As far the F90 parameter is concerned, it is exactly as the F0. The difference is it handles the reflected color of the surface when seen at a grazing angle. After all, I'm quite sure that the letter F stays for Fresnel and the number is the angle between the camera vector and the surface normal. Its influence is quite limited though, and I'm pretty sure the falloff was set to some physically accurate thing, but it's a bit of a shame that we can control it. Well, that's what I would have said if I didn't casually discover this flip-flop material function, which is essentially a workaround Epic added exactly for this reason. Last but not least, the roughness. Let's talk about it. Regarding the usual pin, there's not much to say, it's our good old roughness. What's really interesting here is the addition of the secondary roughness. If we simply try to mess around with these two properties, the feeling we get is that, well, we're calculating a second version of the material with a different roughness and blending between the two. Even though, don't know, most of the time the outcome feels just weird to me, to be honest. Luckily we have another helper function for these two. Let's hook it up. Thanks to that, we immediately get what the whole thing was intended for by Epic. And now we can see that it somehow keeps these two properties in a value range where the second specular lobe is always a bit bigger than the main one and visible enough to be present but not override it. It also looks like that for very rough materials this thing is not doing anything at all. I admit, it's a bit difficult to clearly understand what's going on just by looking at it, so let's create a graph for this thing too. So, you're seeing in red the second roughness and in green the weight. Interesting, the second roughness reaches 1 and goes above when the roughness reaches 0.5. That explains why after that value looks like nothing is changing anymore. And apparently this thing depends only on the roughness value, it doesn't change with the haziness, which seems to drive only the scale of the weight curve, which basically hovers all the time around 0.5 at full haziness, except for very low roughness values. And I'd say that both curves look pretty arbitrary to me. Like if after implementing the feature someone realized that it was a mess to control and only made sense for very restricted value ranges. So they manually created a couple of curves to remedy to that. But there might be more profound reasons behind this that I don't know. So if I had to guess what's inside this function, I'd say something like this. Two curve samplers that use the roughness as time and the haziness the scales, one of them. Two curves that I may approximate to these functions. Or this to make them fit a bit better. What's this last bit for? I don't know. I had some spare time and decided to fit some functions to these curves just for the sake of it. At this point I would have told you about the performance implications of using this secondary roughness. Because see, when I was testing things out, enabling the secondary roughness and making the material cover the full screen was causing the frame rate to drop quite significantly, and it was also very highly depending on the number of lighting features I enabled. So I thought it was due to the fact that with this feature we're basically calculating the lighting on the surface 2 times. But then when I went back another day to test things again while writing the script for the video, I wasn't able to see any very apparent performance hit anymore. So who knows? It's an experimental feature after all, it does weird things from time to time. Anyways, this covers all the basics of a substrate slab. You'll find this shader complete of nodes on my Patreon. I didn't cover anything more than the basic shading components yet because, as you saw, there was more than enough to say. If you found this kind of analysis interesting, let me know and I'll see you in the next part of this series.